Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on PlanSimple Financial Partners YouTube channel. Today, I'm super excited to have Patrick Delaney from T. Rowe Price joining us. He is the Insights Director at T. Rowe Price, and essentially, he creates and delivers content that's valuable to you, the end user. Patrick, if you can give us a few tidbits or nuggets about what you do at T. Rowe.
Yes, sir, John. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you all for tuning in. I've worked at T. Rowe Price for 23 years, my entire adult life, and I like to say I'm a right brain guy at a financial services firm, which means I care more about how investors and folks like yourself use attitudes and behaviors and emotion that plays into your financial decisions. Finances and money are a very sensitive topic within families, and a lot of times it can create conflict and strife within the family. And we've researched a lot of situations with families just like yours. And we're going to bring you some of that content here and we've also talked about it with John, hopefully work through some of these family conflicts as they relate to your relationship with money.
Great. Looking forward to it, Patrick.
All right. Well, let's start off then with that context. I mean, money, very emotional topic. We did a lot of research over the last few years with families, and I'll give you some characteristics here of some of the folks that we talked to. It was spouses and husbands and wives who had siblings, they had children, and they all had living parents. They all had worked with a financial advisor for at least 3 years. So there might be some of you out there that look like that, and we certainly know that money plays an important role, but we want to help you refine and improve two things during the course of our time today. We want to help you, number one, understand your relationship with money. If you better understand why you interact with money the way you do, why you are a certain way with it, you can have more intent and control and purpose over your decisions around money from this day forward. And so just being aware of why you are with your money the way you are is step one. And then whatever role you're playing today in your financial life or your family's financial life, if you have a better awareness over that, then you can make hopefully more controlled and influential decisions. You have more intent and purpose over that role that you're playing going forward in your family's life. So that's a little bit of background about kind of what we hope to achieve. And certainly John is going to be here helping you understand that. Now, to set this up, we want to bring forward here, there were two kind of North Stars in all of these conversations that we had with families. And obviously, families have very different financial situations, different health situations, more children, less children, second wives. They have all these different things. But regardless of how different the families looked, they all shared kind of two guiding principles that they told us about. These things all surfaced. Number one was, when we talk about money and we talk about leaving money to the children or setting up a fund for our children or offspring or beneficiaries or heirs, if you don't have children, number one is we don't want there to be any surprises. So whatever the conflicts that arise, if you can kind of tree up and have that anchor you and say, listen, we may not always see eye to eye. Obviously they're very emotional, sensitive things that go on, but we don't want there to be any surprises, because usually when heirs and beneficiaries are left to make decisions reactively, all of a sudden they're caught in the moment and you have to decide on something or react to something. It can really expedite and make the emotions even worse.
Yep,
so if you can anchor to, we don't want there to be any surprises. And then we just want it to be fair. Now, I think, John, you can probably see a couple examples of this, but fair today is very different than what it was a generation ago, because families are more modern. And so do you have any comments on either of those two North Stars that you've seen?
Absolutely. It can be very messy. I mean, we see this, unfortunately, when family members pass away and the other family members are in the dark about, what their intent was with a particular account, what type of account is it. There's sometimes some rules associated with it. The government gets involved and says, hey, you got to do certain things a certain way. And yes, you add that onto the emotional side of losing a loved one or a relative or sometimes a friend. It can be really complicated.
Yeah. And it really helps. I mean, I know it's difficult, but trying to get people swimming in the same direction or agreeing on something, when the conversations start to go sideways, and naturally going to have competing egos and personalities and priorities. But if you say, listen, I know we're starting to go sideways here, but let's tree up to these North Stars. No surprises, as fair as possible. And that can try to help resolve some of those conflicts. So in this research, apart from our two North Stars, there were four kind of different dynamics that existed within families. Some of it was between spouses. Some of it was between genders. Some of it was between generations. And we're going to talk about those and ways that you can work those, and certainly ways, John, that I know you've worked with other families and can help these folks solve their conflicts as well.
Absolutely.
So the first one was a saver versus spender mentality. And there's a couple of things I think all of you listening out there need to remember. Number one, we're going to go through a saver versus spender and a couple other different dynamics. There aren't wrong answers here. This isn't wrong. It just is. Again, awareness is the first step in having more control and influence over what you do from here on out. So just if you rank yourself, saver one side of a spectrum, spender on the other side, where do you fall on that? You also have to realize that every family's definition of these things is unique. What one person could consider a spender or a saver, another family could say, you're crazy. I can't believe how you would define it that way. That's another thing I think John can lend here, is some unbiased third-party financial expertise, and he can help you define what these things mean for your family. For example, you see the quote on the screen here. We had to ask the wife in this, all right, and they were both in the room. We said, all right, what are you buying and how often are you buying it? And they both agreed that she was considered the crazy spender. She was buying one new outfit a year. They both agreed that that was the definition of crazy spender. So again, it proves the point. This is all relative. You need to define it for yourselves. But here's the important part of saver versus spender. I have to ask you and ask yourselves, go through this exercise. What role did money play in your childhood? Because the answer to that question will give you a lot of insight as to where you fall on this spectrum. For example, if we were all in a room together, I would ask you, what do you think's better, saving or spending? Most of the hands would go up for saver. But we've all heard the phrase, you've got to spend money to make money. And I had a colleague who helped in this research, and she told me a story one time that completely changed my perspective. She said she grew up in Kansas City, Kansas side of Kansas City, had two sisters, well-to-do family, but not wealthy, but they weren't struggling. And she said, every time I asked my parents for something growing up, and she said, I'm not talking about a car, not talking about jewelry, not talking about a lavish vacation. She said, to go to the movies, dinner and a movie as a family, go to a water park together, something to build some bonding and camaraderie. Her parents always told her the same thing. She said, we can't afford it. She said, but I knew they could afford it. So I didn't hear we can't afford it. I heard, Gene, you're not worth it. Completely blew my mind as to how you could view this saver or spender, and why my former colleague is not a huge saver today, because she wants to show people in her life that they're worth it. So I'll pause there. And John, if you have any examples, especially for people falling on different sides of the same side of the spectrum.
Yeah, that's a really deep insight into somebody's psyche as a child. And sometimes we come across a scenario where the household has two spenders, and that couldn't be any worse. Let's just say that, because it's the Groundhog Day effect, right? It's every paycheck, whether it's bi-weekly or once a month, and they go out and they'll buy something, and then there's a little bit of the sugar high from it, but then there's buyer remorse for the next 3 weeks until they get the next paycheck, right? And I've seen it whether they're making a household income of 100 grand or 500 grand. And then invariably there's going to be something that catastrophic happens. Hopefully it's no death or illness, but the air conditioning can go out, the car needs new tires, something like that, and they're scrambling.
Yep. Yeah. So it's being aware of why you are the way you are in this, whether you want to be like your parents and emulate their good behavior, or you're doing the opposite because you saw how it impacted you negatively and you don't want that to continue maybe for future generations. But being aware of how money was used as a child is a very enlightening experience that can help you build control going forward. The second one was security versus opportunity. Now, this is a new age spin on an age-old risk tolerance questionnaire. Do you prefer to put your money somewhere safe, or do you prefer to be a little bit more opportunistic? Now, a couple things here. The definition and perspective around risk, rightly or wrongly, tends to fall along gender lines, regardless of your role in your family's finances. And here's what I mean. The Corporate Executive Board and Gartner Research, they do a survey every year about risk tolerance, and they ask security versus opportunity. And women rate security almost 30% higher than men do every single year on a 100-point scale. it's crazy, and it always falls along those gender lines. Now, I don't know why that is, but a couple examples or a couple things that help to anchor me and put it in the context for me. You think about traditional societal norms, you think about traditional gender norms, you think about the influential period of kids growing up and the messages that they're receiving then and how that shapes who they become as an adult. Now, the two examples, one we go back 10,000 years, the other one we just go back a few years. But if you think about cavemen and women and cave families, if there was such a thing, traditionally the men would have to go out and get the food, and the women stayed back, tended to the families. Now, in a cave setting, the fire was nice and warm. It kept people safe and it kept predators away. But when the family is starving, the men had to venture away from the cave and away from the fire. So risk to the man, Paleolithic man, meant opportunity for my family to thrive, to succeed, to continue. But the woman who was watching the man walk away from the fire and out into the saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths, she's thinking, man going out and risking his life, good chance he's not coming back. So you think about how that manifests itself in the human brain as we evolve. Now, British playground study a few years ago, all these researchers were on the UK, stood up against the walls of elementary school age playgrounds and just listened. And what they found, and they listened to all the different directions and guidance offered to the kids all across the country, what they found was that young boys were more likely to hear, get up, brush it off, you're okay, you're tough, hang in there. Girls were much more likely to hear, be careful, don't do that, slow down, be cautious. You think about how those things manifest themselves as you grow into a teenager. It's what I call the fingerprint on the brain theory. Everything that a child goes through from ages 0 to 10 leaves a little fingerprint on their brain. It helps shape who they become and how they view the world when they grow up. I mean, it's a reason why I've done this presentation a lot. I was walking through this dynamic for somebody else earlier this year. And actually, it was a room of all women. A woman comes up to me during a break, says, I'm so glad you put that into context for me. And because I thought, I was talking to my advisor one time and they said, well, what's your risk tolerance? And she said, low, like none. And when then they left it at that. She said, Pat, when she said risk tolerance, in my mind, I said, what's my tolerance for me walking up to the edge of a cliff and jumping off? Low to none there. Same thing, riding down a highway with your seatbelt off, right? Risk to women generally means chance for negative outcome. But for the man, no pain, no gain. That's what's been ingrained in our minds since we were kids in the British playground system, apparently. So I'll pause here, John. Do you have any feedback on different sides of the spectrum here?
It does sound stereotypical, Pat, but unfortunately, we do see women have a more conservative approach, building up to retirement, and then obviously once they enter retirement, making sure that they clasp onto that next nest egg, and which is very much valid. However, what I found is that through the proper education of compounding interest over the course of time, prudent financial planning, and risk tolerance, that majority of both men and women are open to taking on the appropriate risk based on their age. Now, we obviously don't force their hand, but we do educate, and hopefully that permits them to have a comfortable decision.
Yeah, the other thing I'll say here, it's right. I mean, again, building that awareness, building that knowledge base helps to break down some kind of preconceived notions or historical biases from the caveman days. It also doesn't have to be an either or. And this is a quote you can see on the screen here, taken from our research, where this woman's husband kept his money under the mattress, and she was like, "Listen, I want to put it in growth funds and mutual funds." It doesn't have to be either or. It can be both. You can say, "Listen, same thing with saver spender. What is it going to take for you to feel safe and secure, or have a certain amount of money saved every month, every year? It could be a certain percentage of your paycheck, money going into a 401k." For one lady we spoke to, it was real estate. Knowing that I had these properties to fall back on gave us kind of permission to be more opportunistic. So it's kind of a bucket approach. You fill one bucket first, fill the safe and secure bucket first, then move on to the other ones. And that way you can accommodate somebody's need for security or saving, but also then accommodate and giving permission to the other half of that family, which might be a little bit more opportunistic. All right. Third dynamic, communication around money. So where we found that risk sometimes fell along gender lines, communication around money falls generationally. We do you can see at the source at the very bottom here, we do a money confident kids survey every year. And every year it's funny. We ask the parents around reluctance to talk to their children about certain topics, health, marriage, a lot of things, schooling, death, money, and only death ranked higher than money. Than in talking to talking to children about things. And if anybody here is a Seinfeld fan, you know the famous clip where you say, public speaking is the country's number one fear, death is number two. So that means if you go to a funeral, you're better off doing the eulogy than you are in the casket. Anyhow, so talked about a reluctance around money. You can see on the chart here, it's not hugely weighted one way or the other. A lot of people are reluctant. Some are not so reluctant. Here's what I'll say. When we ask the children in our study every year, we say, why do you think you should know everything that there is to know about your family's financial situation or what's coming to you or the different accounts? And they always say the same things. They're very benevolent. They're saying, I just want to make sure mom and dad are going to be okay. So that's why I need to know. I need to make sure mom's going to be okay if dad passes away. I need to know if my husband or wife and I need to build an in-law suite. We need to know that a few years in advance before somebody passes away, so we can start to plan for some of these things. Where when you ask the parents, why do you want to hold things back from your children? The demotivating factor is usually number one. Is they don't want to cause what my stepdad would say. We don't want you to be an unproductive member of society. They don't want to demotivate them from going out and starting a career, making money on their own. Money is an emotional, sensitive topic, and sometimes it doesn't end with money. It starts with money, but ends in death or some other sensitive family situation. So you don't want the conversation to spiral. One father recently told us in one of the surveys, I don't want my net worth winding up on Twitter. I guess it's now X, but either way, social media, let's call it. They don't want it to leak out on social media. There's kind of a privacy issue there. Here's what I'll say around this is that this is where your North Stars or your anchors really come into play. You're talking to somebody, you're talking to your husband and wife. They're very closed off, very reluctant, hold everything close to the vest. And they say, nobody needs to know. And you say, well, if you don't want any surprises, they need to know something. You don't want to surprise them at this very important, sensitive time and moment with something as big as this. So how do you walk through this? You got your North Star there to anchor you. And one of the biggest inhibitors or hurdles that we heard from parents was, I don't want to give my kids a number, because what if the number's not there when it's time for them to inherit the money? What if there's a market correction? What if we need long-term care? And here's where you can say, talking to your children about money and making a plan never has to involve a debt percentage, dollar sign, or a number. It's about putting a process in place, having the necessary documentation, and knowing who are the people that are going to execute on that. You never have to hang a number and set them up for a bad expectation. It's about the process, the people, and the documentation. And John, if you've got comments there.
Absolutely. The most successful clients in my space are the ones that communicate not just with one another as spouses or partners, but also with their children. And having that game plan spelled out, making sure that there are no surprises or punches thrown on the back end, because there is always a back end, right? Unfortunately, death is a reality. And so we need to manage the expectation of potential costs and expenses associated with that, as well as the distribution of those assets. And so having that game plan is crucial. And we often act as the intermediary amongst all of the family members, assuming that they are communicative enough.
Yeah, I've had one advisor say, they use the phrase family civil war. They say, if you don't communicate around money at that moment, and there are a lot of surprises, people are left in the dark, there's not a good process in place, they didn't have an advisor to talk them through this. He said that sometimes this can start a family civil war that drags on for decades and spirals out of control. And Absolutely. So even if you are reluctant, again, just have the process and the people and the documentation in place. You don't want that family civil war going on. All right, the last one here. And we talked about the social media. We talked about the net worth. Fascination versus obligation. So are you fascinated by the financial markets. John, I'm sure that you know these people. These are the people that really sit there for all 60 minutes on the Zoom call or the actual meeting and want to get into the weeds with you, asking you questions, going deeper, the how and the why behind some of these things. But it's the obligated people that it's a little bit tougher. They whether they don't care about the markets, it's not that they don't want to do it. It's not that they can't learn about it. It's just, it's not a personal interest to them. And I think that the kicker here is that, and we'll just say there's a household CFO usually. The household CFO is usually the fascinated person who's usually taking the meetings, being proactive, working with the financial professionals, kind of at the helm of their family's finances. And then there's the obligated person who feels like they have to take a back seat, who feels like they have to be subservient because what do they have to add? They're not a number cruncher. They're exactly like me. They're a right brain person who likes the big picture and storytelling and all of the emotional qualitative aspects of their family or their own life. And here's the big aha for me. And John, I'm sure you've seen this with spouses or brothers, sisters, whoever comes in. You probably have the one person who's sitting with you at your desk, the other person who's in the back in a different room, didn't even take the meeting. And if they are there, they're on their phone, they're reading a magazine, they're completely disengaged. There's two sides to every financial planning equation. There's the qualitative side, there's the money side, and there's the non-money side. And so for those of you out there who might be watching, who feel obligated, who feel like I don't have anything to add in this conversation because I don't give a damn about the financial markets or Bloomberg or inflation or GDP or anything like that. I will ask all of you, you do have a plan or an idea of what you want to achieve over the next year. You do have a plan or an idea or strategy for your family over the next 5 years, or where you want your kids to go to school, or what type of legacy you want to leave them, or how you want to be remembered. All of you should be saying yes. And if that's the case, you absolutely have a big role to play in your family's financial life. Because before we figure out the money, you need to figure out what you're going to do with it first. So the strategy and the vision is what is the front end of that equation. And that's where you come into play. And without the strategy and the vision, the money is just a mechanism to execute the tactics of the strategy. So before we can get to the numbers side, you've got to figure out the strategy and the goals and the vision. So you do have a role to play in your family's financial life, even if you don't want to go in and have the meeting every time and get into the weeds on the statement. You do have an important role to play. It's just on the front end of a financial planning conversation about strategy and vision.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we love when both partners or husbands and wives, embrace the meeting initially and ongoing. But the reality is, Patrick, is that there is that person on their phone or more worried about something else in the background and just says, okay, you guys figure it out. And that is not a healthy financial plan. We commonly use roadmaps and sometimes even vision boards, as kind of corny as that sounds, but begin with the end in mind. Like, let's understand where we want to go before we start crunching numbers and figuring out budgets and savings and all that.
You say, I know we only have a couple minutes here, but you brought up the vision board and you said it's corny, and I absolutely love that idea. And I'll share a story with you. A couple years ago, a buddy was going through a couple things, and he's like, "Yeah, I had to write this family mission statement the other day." And I'm like, "Oh, that's cheesy. I feel like I'm in a corporate training if I'm going to do that." And he goes, "All right, why don't you do one?" And I said, "Like, I don't know what my family's all about. I don't need to do a mission statement." And he goes, "Write one then." I go, "I'm fine, I will." And you know what? It was tough. It was a lot tougher than I thought, on two reasons. Number one, it forces you to get specific. You weed out a lot of noise around what really matters. And the second thing is that it makes me examine my life. And after I wrote this statement, I said, I'm not doing and spending my money and time where I should be. I'm doing and spending my money and time on things that really shouldn't mean as much to me from a value standpoint. And so I did a Delaney family mission statement. And since that, which is about 18 months ago, I have made different financial decisions with my life. Sure, my back porch, which is right over here to my left, probably is condemnable. But I've also done a lot of traveling with my daughters since I did that, which was a key priority of ours. And so I would urge you, do the vision board with John. It does seem corny, but it will force you to take stock and figure out what's really important from a financial standpoint. And it really serves as a nice decision tree when you come into competing priorities or different personalities that want to go different places. You can say, just like the anchors about no surprises, Does this align with the pillars in our mission statement as a family?
Couldn't have said it better myself, Patrick. And that is the key. That is the key. Having an open dialogue, starting the process, having a conversation, whether it's with myself or anybody at my firm, or their own relationships, their own financial advisors, making sure that they're having these conversations and revisiting them, not just having the conversation once and, oh, we talked about that 5-10 years ago when we did our wills, as an example. But no, like, hold themselves accountable, because things have a tendency to change. We sure know that investments and account values change. So reviewing those with regularity, while they're important, reviewing what's special to them, what's unique to their household, is the key. Before we part ways, Patrick, again, I can't thank you enough for your time, and T. Rowe Price for supporting what we're doing here at PlanSimple. If the viewer wants to find any information about you or what you're putting out there, is there anything out there, maybe your LinkedIn or social?
Yeah, you can search Patrick Delaney, T. Rowe Price at LinkedIn. That's, if you want to, if you're a geek like me and like to dive into the emotion and psychology around money, but they can also find it by going to you, John. And we're happy to we've got a family dynamics worksheet where you can chart yourself and your family, the saver, spender, security versus opportunity, closed, open, and fascinated, obligated. Chart yourself, chart your spouse, chart your family. And if, as I always say, I know this is dramatic, but if you don't like what you see, then you can work with somebody like John to improve it. But awareness is step one, and figuring out why you are the way you are. And then you've got the tools in place, you got the resources through John that can help you improve the areas that you want to improve. And I think that's key. And we're happy to make that available to your viewers afterwards.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, appreciate the support, appreciate the nod. And, for those that haven't subscribed, please do hit that subscribe button. We'll continue to push out more content similar to this, and hope to have Patrick on again.
Yep. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thank you, John.
All right. Thank you.